The kitchen clock clicked to 7:18 p.m. I glanced at it again, then out the window, the last sliver of sun clinging to the horizon. Shauna should have been back by 7, tops. Swimming practice was never more than an hour, and the pool was 10 minutes away, if that. Usually, I'd hear her key in the lock by now, the rustle of her swim bag hitting the floor in the hall, maybe even a call of, "Honey, I'm home," echoing from the doorway. Tonight, the house felt quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual, the ticking clock almost aggressive in its steady rhythm. I was slicing vegetables for dinner, the rhythmic thump-thump of the knife against the cutting board usually a comforting sound, a soundtrack to our evening routine. Tonight, it just amplified the silence. It wasn't just the lateness. It was everything lately. The swimming had started innocently enough, a way for Shauna to de-stress, she said. "Doctor's orders, Dennis, relax more," she'd laughed, throwing her arm around me. And I was all for it. She'd always been active, but work had her chained to a desk for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. The pool seemed like a healthy escape. But then the escape started stretching out. An hour practice became an hour and a half, then sometimes nearly 2. "Just chatting with the girls afterwards," she'd say, breezing in, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. At first, I didn't think twice. Women and their chats, right? Except the chats were always after the later practices, the ones that started at 6, ending closer to 8. And lately, something else had changed. Her swimsuits. She used to just grab an old sporty one from the drawer, the kind built for laps, function over fashion. Now, she was pulling out ones I hadn't seen before. Sleeker, darker fabrics, cut a little higher on the hip. Subtle shifts, maybe, but noticeable when you paid attention. And then there was the throwing on of clothes after practice. Before, it was a quick change in the locker room, practical and fast. Now she'd come home, head straight to the bathroom, and stay in there for ages. When she finally emerged, she'd have traded her swimsuit for leggings and a loose top, her wet hair twisted up in a towel, but she'd smell different. Not just chlorine. Faintly floral, maybe? Something I couldn't quite place, and definitely not our usual lavender soap. Tonight, though, it was more than just late. It was the message. Running late from the pool. Don't wait up for dinner. Just that. No explanation, no sorry, just a flat, detached text. It felt curt. Unlike her. The knife slipped, nicking my finger. A bead of blood welled up, red against the pale vegetable. I sucked on it, the metallic tang sharp on my tongue. Annoyance prickled at me. And something colder, deeper. Worry. Or something closer to suspicion. A seed of doubt planted and starting to sprout thorny roots in my chest. The front door finally clicked open. I turned, expecting to see Shauna, her usual slightly breathless rush into the kitchen. Instead, she lingered in the hallway, silhouetted against the dim porch light. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. She didn't step further in, didn't meet my eyes. She just stood there, a shadowy figure in our brightly lit home. And in that moment, the silence wasn't just quiet anymore. It was thick, heavy, charged with something I couldn't name, but instinctively knew I didn't want to face. She lingered there, just inside the doorway, and the silence stretched, a rubber band pulled taut, about to snap. "Hey," she repeated, still soft, avoiding my gaze, her eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder, at the spice rack, maybe, or the magnetic knife strip. Anything but me. "Hey yourself," I managed, forcing a casual tone that felt brittle even to my own ears. I turned back to the vegetables, chopping a little too forcefully, the knife hitting the board with sharp, insistent thuds. "Dinner's almost ready. Just waiting for you." She finally moved, drifting further into the kitchen, but she didn't come closer to me, didn't offer a kiss, not even a brush of her hand against my arm, which was our usual. She just stood by the counter, still in shadow, and I noticed it then. She wasn't carrying her swim bag. Usually, that canvas tote, faded from chlorine and sun, was slung over her shoulder, or dropped unceremoniously by the door. Tonight, her hands were empty. A flicker of something, hope, ignited in my chest, quickly doused by a wave of colder dread. Maybe, just maybe, she had forgotten something. Maybe she'd turn around with a laugh, "Oops, forgot my bag," and go back for it. A perfectly reasonable explanation for being late. A chance for everything to be normal again. I waited, holding my breath almost, listening for the sound of her retrieving the bag, the click of the door again. Silence. She just stood there. Hungry? I asked, still chopping, not looking at her directly, trying to sound like this was just any other Tuesday evening. Not really, she said, her voice even quieter now, almost a murmur. Ate something at the pool. At the pool. I finally turned to face her, raising an eyebrow, trying for light teasing, masking the knot tightening in my stomach. Since when do they serve dinner at the community pool? A ghost of a smile touched her lips, not reaching her eyes. Protein bar, she clarified. Vending machine. Needed something to tide me over. Right. I turned back to the vegetables, the playful tone gone, replaced by something flat, heavy. So, no swim bag tonight? I kept my voice casual, like I was just making conversation, but every nerve ending in my body was screaming. She hesitated, a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but enough. Oh, she said then, a little too quickly, a little too brightly. Yeah, forgot it. Left it in the locker room. Pick it up tomorrow. Tomorrow. I stopped chopping, finally putting the knife down, turning to face her fully. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence. But, don't you need your swimsuit to wash it? It'll smell of chlorine if you leave it damp overnight. She blinked, and for the first time tonight, her eyes met mine. But they didn't hold my gaze. They flickered away, down to the countertop, then back up, then away again, like trapped birds. Oh no, it's fine, she said, her voice a little too casual again, a little too dismissive. I had a spare. A spare. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and disbelieved. In your locker? Yeah, she said, nodding quickly, too quickly. Just, one of those older ones. Emergency thing. Right, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. A spare swimsuit. In her locker. For emergencies. Except, Shauna wasn't the emergency preparedness type. She was spontaneous, sometimes chaotic, definitely not the kind of person who meticulously stocked spare swimsuits in locker rooms, just in case. And even if she was, why wouldn't she bring the wet one home to wash? That was her routine. Always. Swim, shower, throw the wetsuit in the mesh bag, bring it home, rinse it out, hang it to dry. That was Shauna. Except lately, Shauna seemed to be shifting, changing, becoming someone else. Someone who went to swimming practices that stretched for hours. Someone who wore different swimsuits. Someone who smelled faintly floral after chlorine. Someone who forgot her swim bag. Someone who had spare swimsuits in lockers. And someone who wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at her, really looked at her, standing there in my kitchen, and it felt like looking at a stranger. The way her shoulders were held, slightly hunched, almost defensively. The tight set of her jaw. The way she kept fiddling with the end of her towel, twisting it, untwisting it, twisting it again, her fingers working nervously. This wasn't just about a late swim practice, or a forgotten swim bag, or a spare swimsuit. This was deeper. Something cold and sharp was coiling in my gut, a feeling I hadn't felt in years, not since college, when my first girlfriend. No. I pushed that thought away, a knee-jerk reaction of denial. Shauna wasn't like that. Our Shauna, my Shauna, the woman I'd built a life with, laughed with, cried with, dreamed with. She wouldn't. But the doubts were there now, insidious whispers growing louder in the silence of my kitchen. The little inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in behavior, the avoidance, the flimsy excuses. They were adding up, forming a pattern, a picture I desperately didn't want to see. "So," I said, my voice sounding strained tight. "Spare swimsuit, huh?" I tried to keep the skepticism out of my voice, but I could hear it creeping in, a hard edge I couldn't quite control. She finally looked at me again, her eyes wide now, too wide, almost pleading. "Dennis," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just swimming lessons." And in that moment, hearing those words, swimming lessons, the headline of an article I'd scrolled past online earlier that day flashed into my mind. She said it was just swimming lessons. He uncovered something much deeper. Too deep. A chill went through me, colder than the chlorine smell I suddenly imagined clinging to her skin. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she said them. Too quick. Too rehearsed. Too desperate to convince me. It was just swimming lessons, she said. But something in her eyes, in her voice, in the heavy, suffocating silence between us, screamed that it was anything but. And a horrifying certainty began to bloom in my chest, cold and undeniable. It wasn't just about swimming. It was about something much, much deeper. And I had a sickening feeling I was about to drown in it. "Swimming lessons," she repeated, the words hanging between us, flimsy and threadbare, a pathetic attempt to cover something vast and dark. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the lie itself, it was the weakness of it, the sheer ineptitude of the cover-up. It was like she didn't even think I deserved a better lie, as if I was too stupid to see through this paper-thin charade. And that, maybe even more than the suspicion of infidelity itself, stung like acid. I stared at her, my mind racing, sifting through the past weeks, months even, trying to piece together the fragmented clues, the subtle shifts I'd dismissed, the nagging unease I'd ignored. The late practices, the new swimsuits, the floral scent, the forgotten swim bag, the spare in the locker, the avoidance, the lies. It all coalesced now, solidifying into a sickening certainty. "Right," I said again, my voice low, dangerous even to my own ears. "Spare swimsuit. Swimming lessons." I let the words hang in the air, dripping with sarcasm, heavy with unspoken accusation. She didn't meet my gaze. She busied herself with the towel again, twisting it tighter, her knuckles white. "Dennis, she started, then trailed off, her words dissolving into a mumbled nothing. I watched her, every fiber of my being on high alert, every sense sharpened. The way she wouldn't look at me, the nervous fidgeting, the faint tremor in her voice. It was all screaming guilt. Later, after a strained, silent dinner where neither of us touched our food, she said she was going to take a shower. "Long day," she mumbled. Another flimsy excuse thrown like a wet blanket over the simmering tension in the house. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, just watching as she walked out of the kitchen, her movements stiff, unnatural. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hall, the click of the bathroom door closing. But not quite closing. I noticed it then, a sliver of light still visible under the doorframe. She hadn't latched it properly. A strange compulsion seized me. I don't know what it was, a need for confirmation, a desperate desire to disprove my growing suspicions, or just a morbid curiosity to see how deep this rabbit hole went. Whatever it was, it pulled me from my chair, my feet moving almost of their own accord. I walked slowly down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the carpet, the silence in the house amplifying with each step. As I neared the bathroom door, I could hear the rush of the shower, a steady white noise that seemed to swallow all other sounds. I paused, my hand hovering over the door handle, my heart pounding in my chest. This felt wrong, invasive, like crossing a line I shouldn't cross. But the need to know, the gnawing uncertainty, was stronger. I pushed the door gently, just a fraction, widening the gap from a sliver to a narrow opening. My breath hitched in my throat. Through the crack, I could see her. The steam filled the small space, blurring the edges of the scene, creating a hazy, dreamlike quality. She was facing away from me, her back to the door, her silhouette just visible through the frosted glass of the shower door. I could see the curve of her spine, the outline of her shoulders, the dark shape of her wet hair plastered against her neck. Then she moved. She reached for her swim bag, which was hanging on a hook on the back of the door, and rummaged inside. My eyes were drawn to the contents she pulled out. A damp towel, a shampoo bottle, and then something smaller, darker. She held it up, and I recognized it instantly. Her underwear. A lacy black thong. She hung it on the small retractable clothesline above the tub, and as it swung slightly, catching the light, I saw it clearly. It was damp. Not soaking wet, but definitely damp. Like it had been worn, and then quickly rinsed, but not fully dried. And then she turned, just slightly, to reach for the soap, and for a fleeting second, her side profile was visible through the frosted glass. And I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The distinct outline of underwear beneath her skin. The slight indentation at her hips. The subtle crease, gone. Smooth skin. She wasn't wearing underwear. The blood drained from my face. My head swam. It was such a small thing, almost insignificant in itself. Wet underwear in the bag. No underwear on her now. But combined with everything else, the late practices, the lies, the avoidance, it was devastatingly conclusive. It was like the final click of a lock, the last piece of the puzzle falling into place, revealing a picture I'd been desperately trying to ignore. She hadn't been wearing underwear at swimming practice. She'd changed out of it afterwards, rinsing it quickly, stuffing it in her bag. But why? Why go to such lengths to hide something so intimate? Unless it was about someone else seeing her without it. Someone she wanted to see her without it. Someone who wasn't me. The shower shut off. The sudden silence was deafening. Panic clawed at my throat. I stumbled back from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I retreated to the kitchen, collapsing back into my chair, my head spinning, my stomach churning. She emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, wrapped in her robe, her hair still damp, a forced smile plastered on her face. "Shower felt good," she said brightly. Too brightly. "Feel a bit more human now." She walked towards me, and I just stared at her, my eyes fixed on hers, trying to read the truth in their depths. But they were guarded, shuttered, closed off. "Shauna," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, all the anger and hurt and betrayal coalescing into a cold, hard certainty. "We need to talk." Her forced smile faltered, then vanished completely. Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear in their depths. "Talk," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "About what?" "Don't play games, Shauna," I said, my voice hardening, the ice in my veins starting to spread. "Don't insult my intelligence." She backed away slightly, her eyes darting around the kitchen, as if searching for an escape route. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, her voice trembling now. "The swimming lessons, Shauna," I said, standing up, closing the distance between us, my gaze unwavering, locking onto hers. "They're not just swimming lessons, are they?" Her breath hitched. She swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Dennis, please," she whispered, her voice pleading now. "Don't do this." "Do what, Shauna?" I pressed, my voice rising, the dam of my carefully controlled emotions starting to crack. "Don't ask you to be honest with me? Don't ask you to explain why you're lying to my face." Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her lips trembling. She looked like a cornered animal, frightened and desperate. "The spare swimsuit, Shauna," I continued, relentlessly pushing, needing to hear it, needing to break through the wall of lies. "The forgotten swim bag, the late nights, the floral scent, the underwear." My voice cracked on the last word, the raw pain finally breaking through the ice. Her eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down her face now. She turned away, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Silence descended, heavy and thick, broken only by her choked sobs and my ragged breathing. I watched her, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, the pain so sharp, so visceral, it was almost unbearable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she lowered her hands, her face blotchy and wet, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor, her voice barely audible. "Okay," she whispered, the word broken, defeated. "Okay, fine. It's not just swimming lessons." The admission hung in the air, stark and brutal. Not just swimming lessons. The innocent phrase, the flimsy excuse, shattered into a million pieces, revealing the ugly, painful truth beneath. "Who is he, Shauna?" I asked, the question raw, torn from my throat. She flinched, as if I'd struck her. She shook her head, still not meeting my eyes. "It doesn't matter," she mumbled, her voice choked with tears. "It matters to me, Shauna," I said, my voice rising again, anger finally surging, hot and violent, pushing aside the cold numbness. "It matters because you've been lying to me. You've been sneaking around behind my back. You've been betraying me." My voice cracked, the full weight of her betrayal crashing down on me. Betrayal. The word echoed in my mind, a harsh, ugly sound. She started sobbing again, louder this time, her whole body shaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she choked out, the classic pathetic excuse of the guilty. "It just happened. Just happened." I repeated, incredulous, rage boiling up inside me. "Just happened that you lied to my face? Just happened that you snuck around behind my back? Just happened that you? The words failed me, choked by the pain and anger. I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, this woman I'd loved, and I saw a stranger. A liar. A betrayer. And something inside me snapped. Something broke, irrevocably. "Get out, Shauna," I said, my voice cold, hard, final. "Pack your things and get out. Now." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Dennis," she whispered. "Please, don't." "Don't what, Shauna?" I cut her off, my voice like ice. "Don't ask you to take responsibility for what you've done. Don't ask you to leave after you've turned our marriage into this." I gestured around the kitchen, at the silent, heavy air, at the wreckage of our evening, at the wreckage of us. "Get out, Shauna. I don't want you here anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy, final, irrevocable. And in her eyes, I saw the dawning realization that I meant it. That this wasn't just anger talking. This was done. Finished. Over. And the silence that followed was the silence of a tomb. "Get out," I repeated, the words echoing in the kitchen, cold and sharp as shards of glass. She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief, tears still streaming down her cheeks, leaving wet tracks on her pale skin. "Dennis, you don't mean that." But I did. Every syllable, every icy consonant, was deliberate, intentional. The shock of her confession, the brutal confirmation of my suspicions, had cauterized the raw pain, replacing it with a chilling resolve. The man standing before her wasn't the same man she'd lied to for weeks. Something had hardened within me, snapped shut like a trap. "Pack your things, Shauna," I said again, my voice unwavering, devoid of any warmth or emotion. "I want you gone. Tonight." She shook her head slowly, mechanically, like a broken doll. "But where will I go?" The question hung in the air, pathetic in its self-pity, completely missing the point of the devastation she had wrought. "Frankly, Shauna," I said, my voice dangerously low, "that's no longer my concern." The callousness of my own words surprised even me, but I felt nothing, no remorse, no guilt, just a hollow emptiness where empathy used to be. She finally seemed to grasp that I was serious. The shock in her eyes slowly morphed into a raw, animalistic fear. She took a step back, then another, as if physically recoiling from the coldness emanating from me. She looked around the kitchen, at the familiar cabinets, the worn countertop, the breakfast bar where we'd shared countless mornings, suddenly seeing it all through the lens of loss, the dawning realization that this life, our life, was shattering around her. Without another word, she turned and fled, a broken sob escaping her lips as she ran from the kitchen, her footsteps heavy and uneven on the wooden floor of the hallway. I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to her frantic movements upstairs, the muffled thuds of drawers opening and closing, the rustling of clothes being yanked from hangers, the choked sobs that punctuated the chaotic sounds of her dismantling our life. I didn't move, didn't offer to help, didn't offer comfort, didn't offer anything. I just stood there in the kitchen, the silence returning, heavier now, laden with the unspoken, the shattered, the irreparable. The ticking of the clock seemed to mock me, each second a hammer blow against the fragile remnants of my composure. Time stretched, distorted, each minute feeling like an hour. The sounds from upstairs eventually subsided, replaced by a strained, pregnant silence. Then, the heavy thud of her suitcase being dragged down the stairs, each bump against the steps echoing through the silent house like a death knell. She reappeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale and streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen, but somehow, amidst the devastation, there was a flicker of defiance, or perhaps just a desperate attempt to salvage some shred of dignity. She was carrying a small suitcase, the one we used for weekend trips, the one that held memories of laughter and shared adventures, now a symbol of our broken promises, our fractured past. She didn't meet my eyes as she walked past me, her footsteps hesitant, uncertain, as if even now, a part of her still expected me to stop her, to call her back, to tell her it was all a mistake, to beg her to stay. But I remained silent, a statue carved from ice, watching her go, watching her walk out of my life, out of our life, without a single word, a single touch, a single backward glance. The front door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing through the empty house. Final, absolute. And then, there was silence. A silence so profound, so complete, it was almost deafening. A silence that screamed of absence, of loss, of betrayal. A silence that settled over me like a shroud, suffocating me, crushing me under its weight. I stood there for a long time, unmoving, unthinking, just existing in the hollow echo of her absence. The kitchen, just minutes ago charged with tension and accusation, now felt strangely empty, devoid of life, the silence amplifying the emptiness, mirroring the gaping hole in my chest. Slowly, mechanically, I started to move. I walked through the house, room by room, a ghost haunting the familiar spaces, each step a leaden weight. The living room, where we'd curled up on the sofa watching movies, the dining room, where we'd shared countless meals, the bedroom, our sanctuary, now tainted, violated, irrevocably altered. Her presence was everywhere, and yet, she was gone. A phantom scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a ghostly impression of her laughter echoed in the silence, a faint warmth remained on her side of the bed, a cruel reminder of what was, and what would never be again. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, the weight of it all crashing down on me, a tidal wave of grief and anger and disbelief. Betrayal. The word echoed in my mind, again and again, a bitter, poisonous taste on my tongue. Betrayal. It was a clean, sharp cut, severing something vital within me, leaving a raw, gaping wound that throbbed with pain. Anger flared, hot and violent. How could she? How could she do this to us? To me. The years we'd built together, the promises we'd made, the life we'd shared. All reduced to ashes, consumed by her lies, her deceit, her infidelity. Rage pulsed through me, a burning need for retribution, for vengeance, for someone to blame, for something to lash out at. But then, just as quickly, the anger dissolved, leaving behind a cold, aching sadness. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the already indistinct outlines of the room, the pain raw and visceral, tearing at my insides. Sadness for what we'd lost, for what we'd had, for the future that had just evaporated into thin air. Sadness for the years wasted, the love betrayed, the trust shattered beyond repair. And then, creeping in beneath the anger and sadness, came the insidious tendrils of self-doubt. Was it me? The question whispered in the silence, insidious and undermining. Did I do something wrong? Was I not enough? Did I drive her away? The doubts gnawed at me, picking at the raw edges of my pain, amplifying the hurt, poisoning the well of my self-esteem. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in on me, heavy and suffocating. The silence of the house was broken only by the occasional creaks and groans of the old building settling around me, sounds that amplified the loneliness, the isolation, the utter desolation I felt. Hours passed, blurring into a timeless void. Sleep eluded me, my mind racing, replaying the confrontation, replaying the fragmented memories, replaying the agonizing question. Why? Why had she done this? What had driven her to seek solace, affection, intimacy, in someone else's arms? As dawn finally began to break, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale lavender visible through the bedroom window, a fragile moment of quiet descended. The storm of emotions within me seemed to subside, not vanishing, but receding slightly, leaving behind a desolate calm, a weary exhaustion. I got out of bed, my body stiff and aching, my head throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. I walked to the window, staring out at the slowly awakening world, the faint light casting long, distorted shadows across the empty street. The world outside was going on, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered my life, the mundane routines of morning unfolding as if nothing had changed. And in that quiet pre-dawn moment, a flicker of something shifted within me. Not hope, not yet, but something akin to acceptance. A weary recognition that this was real, this was happening, this was my new reality. The pain was still there, a dull, persistent ache, but the raw, agonizing intensity had lessened, replaced by a heavy, somber weight. I took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling my lungs, a small, involuntary act of defiance against the suffocating weight of grief. The emotional scars would be there, deep and lasting, I knew that. Healing would be a long, arduous process, a climb uphill through a landscape of broken trust and shattered dreams. But somewhere, deep within the wreckage, a tiny spark of resilience flickered. I was still standing. Broken, yes. Scarred, undoubtedly. But still, standing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. Just to breathe. Just to face the day. Just to survive. But even in that fragile moment of nascent resilience, a cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Because I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a long, painful journey into the unknown, a journey haunted by the ghost of betrayal and shadowed by the lingering question. What truly lay beneath the surface of those swimming lessons? What else had she been hiding? And what, if anything, would I uncover next? The first rays of dawn, pale and weak, crept through the blinds, painting stripes of gray light across the empty side of the bed. Empty. The word echoed in my mind, a stark, cold descriptor for the space beside me, the space in my life, the space where Shauna used to be. Used to be. Past tense. It still felt surreal, like a bad dream I'd wake from any minute, and she'd be there, tangled in the sheets, a soft warmth beside me. But the light grew stronger, revealing the emptiness in stark detail, the cold, smooth expanse of the sheets where her body heat no longer lingered. This wasn't a dream. This was real. She was gone. And with her, a whole chapter of my life, ripped out, leaving ragged edges and a gaping void. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a heavy, leaden grief, a dull ache that permeated everything. But beneath the grief, a sliver of something else was starting to emerge. A fragile resolve. Staying in bed, wallowing in despair, wasn't an option. Shauna might have shattered our life, but she wouldn't get to dictate my future. I got out of bed, the cold floor shocking my bare feet, a small jolt that cleared the lingering fog of sleep. I went to the kitchen, the silence amplifying the emptiness of the house. But this time, the silence felt different. Not just heavy and suffocating, but open. Empty, yes, but also uncharted. A blank canvas. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions, the rich aroma filling the silence, a tiny spark of normalcy in the abnormal landscape of my morning. As I sipped the hot, bitter liquid, staring out the window at the slowly awakening street, the decision solidified within me. Divorce. It was the only way forward. A clean break. A necessary severing. A painful, but ultimately liberating, act of closure. The yellow pages felt heavy in my hands, the crisp paper somehow alien now, disconnected from the life I knew. I searched for divorce attorneys, the words jumping out at me, stark and unavoidable. My finger hovered over the numbers, hesitation warring with resolve. This was it. The first concrete step. The point of no return. I took a deep breath, the coffee burning a path down my throat, and dialed. The ringing tone echoed in the silent kitchen, each ring a hammer blow against the remnants of my denial. Then, a voice, brisk and professional, answered. And with a few carefully chosen words, I set the wheels in motion. Divorce proceedings. Legal separation. The dismantling of our shared life, codified in legal jargon, finalized with signatures and stamps. The first few weeks were a blur of paperwork, legal consultations, and awkward phone calls with mutual friends, navigating the delicate social minefield of separation. The house felt cavernous, echoing with silence, each room a stark reminder of Shauna's absence. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her toiletries still lined the bathroom counter, her books still sat on the nightstand, frozen in time, relics of a life that no longer existed. At first, I couldn't bring myself to touch her things, leaving them as they were, as if preserving a shrine to our past. But the weight of her absence, the constant reminders of what was lost, became suffocating. Slowly, hesitantly, I started to clear them away. Her clothes went into boxes, destined for donation. Her toiletries vanished from the bathroom, replaced by my own, starkly minimalist. Her books were packed away, stored in the attic, relics of a closed chapter. The house started to feel lighter. Emptier, yes, but also less burdened by ghosts. I started to rearrange the furniture, shifting things around, creating new spaces, reclaiming the rooms, imbuing them with my own energy, my own personality. I replaced the floral-patterned throw pillows Shauna had loved with solid, dark-colored ones. I moved her delicate ceramic figurines from the mantelpiece and replaced them with my collection of vintage cameras, objects that spoke to my own passions, my own history. And then, I ventured out. Tentatively at first, like testing the waters of a cold sea. I called Mark, an old college friend I'd lost touch with over the years, a guy I used to spend hours jamming with on guitars, a shared passion that had faded amidst the demands of married life. He was surprised to hear from me, but warmly receptive. We met for a beer, then another, and then another, the easy camaraderie of old friendship rekindling over shared laughter and reminiscing about the past. It was awkward at first, navigating conversations without mentioning Shauna, consciously steering clear of the gaping hole in my life. But gradually, as the evening wore on, the awkwardness faded, replaced by a genuine connection, a sense of belonging. It felt good to laugh again, to talk about something other than heartache and betrayal, to remember that there was still life beyond the confines of my grief-stricken house. I started to reconnect with other friends, rekindling dormant friendships, accepting invitations I would have previously declined, filling the empty evenings with human connection, with laughter, with shared experiences. I dusted off my old acoustic guitar, the wood still warm and familiar under my fingers, the strings still resonating with the echoes of forgotten melodies. I started playing again, tentatively at first, rusty and out of practice, but slowly, as the weeks passed, the music flowed back, a cathartic release, a way to channel the pent-up emotions, the unspoken grief, into something beautiful, something creative, something mine. I started running again, too, pounding the pavement in the early mornings, the rhythmic thud of my feet against the asphalt a grounding force, a way to sweat out the anger and sadness, to clear my head, to reclaim my body, my strength, my own physical space. The endorphins kicked in, chasing away the shadows, replacing the leaden weight in my chest with a sense of aliveness. Slowly, Gradually, imperceptibly almost, the gray fog started to lift. The pain was still there, a dull ache, a phantom limb sensation, but it no longer consumed me. There were still moments, unexpected triggers, a song on the radio, a familiar scent, a glimpse of a couple holding hands, that would send a sharp pang of loss through me, a reminder of what I had lost, of what had been stolen. But those moments became less frequent, less intense, the sharp edges softening with time, dulled by the slow, steady process of healing. One evening, weeks into this new solitary existence, I was sitting in my living room, the rearranged furniture bathed in the warm glow of a table lamp, the faint melody of a blues riff drifting from my guitar resting in my lap. I looked around at the space, no longer haunted by Shauna's ghost, now imbued with my own presence, my own style, my own energy. It was different. Emptier, yes, in some ways, but also freer, lighter, authentically, undeniably mine. And in that quiet moment of reflection, the epiphany arrived, subtle and unassuming, yet profound in its simplicity. The end wasn't just an end. It was also a beginning. A painful, brutal, unwanted beginning, yes, but a beginning nonetheless. The betrayal had been a devastating blow, a cruel and unnecessary act of destruction, but it had also, paradoxically, cleared the ground for something new to grow. The old life, the shared life, was gone, irrevocably. But in its place, a new space had opened up, a space for me to rebuild, to rediscover, to redefine myself on my own terms, for my own sake. A faint smile touched my lips, a hesitant, fragile curve, but genuine nonetheless. The scars would remain, deep and lasting, a permanent reminder of the pain I had endured, the betrayal I had survived. But scars, I realized, were also a testament to resilience, to healing, to the enduring strength of the human spirit. They were proof that I had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. That I had weathered the storm, and emerged, changed, yes, but also stronger. I picked up my guitar again, my fingers finding the familiar chords, the blues riff morphing into something more hopeful, more resolute, a melody that spoke not of loss and pain, but of resilience and renewal, of the quiet, determined hope that bloomed in the silence of my newly reclaimed life. The future was still uncertain, unwritten, a blank page waiting to be filled. But for the first time since the world had shattered around me, I felt a flicker of genuine excitement, a sense of anticipation, a quiet, unwavering determination to face that unknown future, not with fear or despair, but with a fragile, nascent hope, and the quiet, powerful knowledge that even from the deepest betrayals, new beginnings could bloom. And maybe, just maybe, these new beginnings could lead me to a place I was always meant to be, a place where I could finally, truly be myself.